All right, hello everyone, and welcome to video number 4 in our series about economic growth and sustainable development or long-term economic prosperity for Unit 2, Area Study 1 in economics for Year 11. So today we're going to be starting to talk about a little bit more about the costs and benefits of economic growth, strengths and weaknesses of it, depending on how it's phrased in whatever you're doing, but cost and benefits is basically how it is outlined in the study design. We're going to start going on a little bit from last time talking about how it's measured, limitations of that, and then looking at aggregate demand and aggregate supply side factors, getting more into the nitty gritty of basically some of the ways that economic growth benefits society and certain stakeholders, and some of the ways that it actually causes negatives for certain stakeholders. So first up, how it affects jobs and employment. So it's kind of a bit of a mix here. So one of the main benefits is if we are growing more, usually it creates more jobs, and then people gain employment, they're happier for that, and it makes living standards better because of that. Some of the cost of it though is that often one of the easiest ways to grow as a business and cut your costs, etc., is to replace people with technology. Like that's how the future's going. You've probably seen, we've used the example like 1,000 times that self-serve checkouts in like Woolworths, Coles, McDonald's, all those kind of places. Those things have been put in place so one person can do a job that probably 6 to 8 people used to do. And that's cutting costs for businesses. That can result in what's called structural unemployment, especially in the short term, where these people are replaced by new equipment to cut costs for businesses, and then they can get better growth because of that. So one of the negatives there is that new technology can actually lead to higher rates of unemployment as robots, or technology in general, it's more fun to say robots, replace labor. Next up, how it affects personal incomes. So if there is more economic growth, it can lead to firms needing more labor resources from households to lift their production levels. And this usually means that more people have jobs, therefore they have more income and more purchasing power. And it also lifts the amount of income tax collected by the government, which in turn can be used to help the needy via welfare payments and the provision of community services. The downside of this is that the extra goods and services aren't always shared equally. The rich tend to benefit most from economic growth, and those who are on lower incomes don't really benefit anywhere near as much because they don't feel those benefits to the same level. How it affects our international trading position. So one of the benefits here is producing more goods and services means we can export more, and our exports will be more attractive to foreign investors, which helps lift our production overall. Some of the costs there is it can cause a trade deficit by raising imports of equipment and materials used by firms. In Australia, we don't have the biggest variety of natural resources or resources in general, therefore we get a lot of them cheaper from overseas. And this can lead to us having an imbalance in trade where we are importing a lot more than we're exporting. Households with too much disposable income might spend it on luxury imports and foreign holidays. Like I know personally, if my income goes up, and restrictions around travel get taken down a little bit, I really want to take my family overseas, potentially to Japan in like cherry blossom season. It would be really nice. Go to Disneyland and stuff. It would be real good. And that's an issue because that's a luxury import. That's money leaving the country, and that's not going to help our economic growth. And if we have too much growth in Australia, or we're not keeping up with demand, and it leads to shortages, inflation can make local producers less competitive. So if prices are increasing because of shortages in Australia, it can mean that our prices are increasing too fast compared to overseas countries, and then our goods and services get less competitive and we can't export as much overall. This kind of flows perfectly into this next point, so how it affects inflation. So if growth is the result of improved productivity or efficiency, then low inflation can be maintained. What that means is rather than increasing our costs, we're producing more with the same inputs, which means that we can maintain low prices. Greater efficiency decreases production costs, and therefore cost inflation should fall. Cost inflation is all about inflation from the business side of things, or the aggregate supply side. Some of the costs here is that when stretched beyond productive capacity, shortages can cause demand inflation. So when we don't have enough supply for the level of demand, what ends up happening is prices just increase till the demand and the supply match. So strong demand can lead to rising costs of inputs, which then drives up prices for consumers, and this leads to cost inflation. And then how it affects material living standards. So if production grows faster than the population, there will generally be more goods and services for each member of society to enjoy, and then average incomes and purchasing power should rise. The downside of this is economic growth may disproportionately benefit the rich. So if we are producing way more in Australia and we're really doing well, it means businesses will be more profitable, but who keeps that profit? Those higher up in the business. People lower down are just getting their same salary that they'd normally get, and that doesn't actually mean they're in a better place than they were before. They're not getting pay rises because their business is earning more money. They're just getting the same income they would get before. How it affects non-material living standards. So positively, there can be positive externalities. Sometimes there's a positive impact on a third party. And growth helps to finance education, healthcare, sports, and the arts, and potentially allows consumers greater choice, increased leisure time, and increased tourism. So the more growth we have, the more choice we're going to have, the more tax the government collects, which they can use to benefit our non-material living standards. It also means we can afford to travel, etc. Some of the costs, the biggest ones are environmental damage and pollution. Also leisure time if we are working more for that economic growth, but environmental damage and pollution are really, really important ones that really don't get touched on enough, which is sad. So for these last few slides, we're going to look at how certain different stakeholders influence economic growth. So firstly, the influence of households. Everyone affects Australia's rate of economic growth by our level of household consumption spending. So if every household in Australia suddenly stopped spending, businesses would just close down and we wouldn't have anything. We wouldn't produce anymore. And the economy would go into free fall. There'd probably be just chaos. So our decisions affect what firms produce and the use of renewable natural resources and non-renewable resources. So what we demand is what people produce, and therefore us demanding things that are sustainable and good for the environment actually has a lot of positive impacts. But what tends to happen for the most part is that we demand low cost things that aren't great for the environment, and we can actually cause more damage for it because we're trying to maximize our purchasing power by buying the cheapest thing for the best value or the best quality. And that can lead to environmental damage because businesses are going to go for the lowest, cheapest, potentially most damaging route to make the most profit. How businesses influence economic growth. So the choice to expand can directly increase output and therefore affect our economic growth, but this can have externalities, and businesses tend to downplay the damage that it could cause to the environment. So there are a lot of examples recently where, for example, like Rio Tinto to increase, or BHP, one of those, to increase the size of the mines that they have, I believe it was Rio Tinto, destroyed some Aboriginal sites. And then they destroyed some more, and the government didn't really do much about it. And so they're going to downplay that and focus on the fact that like they're being able to increase their production. But that's very damaging to the environment and Australia's cultural history. The influence of Greens and conservationists. So heightening awareness around environmental matters and various economic activities such as whaling, overfishing, the use of longline nets, the dangers of nuclear power, excessive logging, the adverse effects of mining, and the need to expand and protect our national parks and heritage areas. There's been more and more issues in Australia where, so we can grow more, they've been reclassifying national parks and taking away a lot of the things that make Australia Australia, which is seen as a negative. And it's good to have the influence of these groups and pressure groups that force the government to hopefully not do the damage that they tend to like to do to push the economy to expand. And it helps protect our natural environment, helps protect wildlife and all those kind of things. And lastly, the influence of the government. So the government try and maintain their goal of strong and sustainable economic growth, which is to see GDP rise by an average of 3 to 3.5% each year. If we produced more than that, it could cause the economy to overheat due to insufficient productive capacity. It could also lead us to go through our resources a lot quicker than we would otherwise, because rapid growth can greatly accelerate environmental damage. So things like deforestation, just air pollution that can occur, like carbon emissions, all those kind of things. And slower rates of growth mean there's unused productive capacity. It means that things are not being used to their full potential, which is also negative because it means like if there's machinery just sitting there dormant, it's a waste, and waste is not good either. We want to be producing to our capacity. And the government then influences these things by they change taxes, they spend on infrastructure, they change environmental policies, which we don't have a lot of environmental policies at the moment if we were to look at current governments, but they do all these different things to try and stimulate spending or create jobs or create growth by doing things the economy needs so that we are able to grow in the future. So one example at the moment with like all the COVID stuff and coronavirus is that the government's starting to focus a lot more on trying to skill up the unemployed people into areas that we have skill shortages in, because then once things start to rebound a bit, these people are going to be better able to rejoin the economy and be contributing in a way that is really beneficial to the economy in the future. All right, so that's basically it for today. That was a lot in a short amount of time. It's all about the strengths and weaknesses of certain areas of growth. And if you can discuss some of those in detail, you are going to have no problems at all. As always, if you have any questions at all, feel free to leave a comment below or send me an email, send me a message. I'm more than happy to help you out. Other than that, I hope you have a wonderful day, and I will see you next time to talk about government policies for real this time, not like last time where I said it and then it wasn't about that this time. Goodbye.